When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I remember that moment so clearly, like it was a photograph stuck in my mind. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. She stood by the sink, her arms crossed tight against her chest, her jaw set hard. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and cold. "I think it's best if you find somewhere else to live, Mama." I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel surprise. What I felt was a strange, heavy calm. It was the feeling you get when you've been waiting for a storm to break, and it finally does. The rain comes, the thunder rolls, and all you can do is stand there and let it wash over you. So I smiled. A small, quiet smile, not of happiness, but of acceptance. I placed the dishcloth I'd been holding onto the counter very neatly, and I simply said, "Okay, dear. I understand." Her face flickered for a second. Maybe she expected a fight, or tears, or pleas. She got none of those things. She just got an old woman's quiet smile and a simple agreement. That moment, that quiet kitchen, that single word, "okay," was the end of one life and the beginning of another. It was the door closing on the family I had tried so hard to hold together. And it all started, as these things often do, with a house, a promise, and a silence that lasted for years. My name is Margaret, but everyone has always called me Maggie. I'm 73 years old now, and I've lived in the same small town my whole life. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name, and the news at the grocery store counter travels faster than the internet. My husband, Frank, and I bought this house 45 years ago. It was just a little bungalow then, with a kitchen that was too small and a backyard that was mostly weeds. But we worked on it year after year. Frank, God rest his soul, could fix anything with a hammer and a stubborn streak. I planted the rose bushes by the front porch, the ones that are still there, blooming. Every summer, like clockwork. We painted the living room a soft yellow, the color of morning sunshine. Every nail, every brushstroke, every flower in that garden was a piece of us. It wasn't just a house. It was our life. It was where we brought our son, David, home from the hospital. It's where we celebrated his first steps, his first day of school, his high school graduation. The walls held the echoes of our laughter, our arguments, our quiet evenings watching the news. Frank passed away 6 years ago. A heart attack, quick and sudden. One day he was there, puttering in the garage, and the next he was gone. The silence in the house after he left was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. The bed was too big. The chair in the living room, his chair, stayed empty. For a long time, I would still make 2 cups of coffee in the morning just out of habit before I remembered. David was our only child. He was a good boy, a little quiet, but with a kind heart, just like his father. After Frank died, he and his wife, Sarah, became my whole world. Sarah was a city girl, sharp and ambitious. She worked in marketing, always on her phone, always talking about deadlines and campaigns. She was different from us, but David loved her, and that was enough for me. I tried my best to be a good mother-in-law. I never gave advice unless it was asked for. I always had a hot meal ready when they visited, and I adored my grandson, Leo, with my whole heart. Leo was the light in my life after the darkness of losing Frank. He had his father's quiet eyes and his mother's fiery spirit. When he was little, he would spend whole weekends with me. We'd bake cookies, making a terrible mess of the flour, and he'd listen, wide-eyed, as I told him stories about his grandfather. Grandpa could build anything, I'd say, and he'd nod, believing it completely. We'd work in the garden, and I'd teach him the names of the flowers. He'd chase the fireflies in the backyard on summer nights, his little laugh tinkling in the air. For those few years, the house felt full again. The first little crack started to show a few years after Frank died. It wasn't anything big, not at first. It was the way Sarah would sigh when I'd suggest we go through some of Frank's old things in the attic. "We can do it later, Maggie," she'd say, not looking up from her phone. "It's not a priority right now." It was the way she'd look at the house. I'd see her eyes drift over the floral wallpaper in a hallway, the one I'd always loved, and her lips would press into a thin line. "This place is good bones," she'd say to David, like it was a fixer-upper project, not my home. She talked about open concept and modernizing the flow. I'd just smile and stir the soup on the stove point one evening. They came over for dinner. Leo was about 9 then. After we ate, Sarah cleared her throat. Maggie, she began, in that smooth, professional voice she used. David and I have been talking. This house is a lot for one person to manage. The yard, the upkeep, it's a lot of work. I wiped my hands on my apron. Oh, it's not so bad, I said. Frank kept everything in good shape. I manage, but for how long? She pressed gently. It was a kind voice, but the words were sharp. The roof is getting old. The furnace is from the 80s. These are big expenses and… Well, we worry about you. David sat quietly, swirling the last of his tea in his cup. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My heart gave a little flutter, a small bird trapped in a cage. Are you suggesting I move? I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. We're suggesting we think about the future, Sarah said. About what's best for everyone. This house, it's David's inheritance. It's the only real asset. If we sold it now, we could use the money to help with a down payment on a bigger place, a place where you could have your own little space, but we'd all be together. It would be safer. More practical inheritance. The word landed on the table like a stone. I had never thought of this house as an inheritance. It was my home. It was where my memories were. It was the last physical piece of Frank I could touch. To sell it felt like selling him. I need to think about it, I stammered. This house, it's everything. Sarah nodded, her smile patient and a little sad. Of course, Maggie. Take all the time you need. We just want you to be safe and comfortable. And we want to build a future for Leo, too. After they left, I sat in Frank's old chair. The room was dark. The word inheritance echoed in my head. It wasn't about love or family or memories. It was an asset, a thing of value to be cashed in. I tried to push the thought away. I told myself I was being too sensitive, too old-fashioned. Sarah was just being practical. She was looking out for the family. Over the next few months, the conversations became more frequent. They'd come over, and the air would feel heavy with unspoken things. Sarah would point out a crack in the ceiling, a damp patch in the basement after heavy rain. It's only going to get worse, Maggie, she'd say. These old houses are money pits. David started to join in quietly. Mom, the stairs are getting steeper for you. We just worried that I started to feel like a guest in my own home. I'd find myself tidying up before they came, as if I was expecting an inspection. I stopped leaving my knitting on the coffee table or my book on the arm of the sofa. I felt the need to make the house look less lived in, less like mine. The tension came to a small head one afternoon when I was watching Leo. He was playing with his toy cars on the living room floor, making little vroom sounds. I was in the kitchen, making his favorite snack, apple slices with peanut butter. Grandma, he called out, when you come live with us, can I have this room? I froze, the knife halfway through an apple. What do you mean? Sweetheart, Mommy says when you come live with us, we can sell this house and buy a big new one. And I can finally have a dog, he said, his voice full of excitement. She says this room would be perfect for a playroom. A cold feeling washed over me. I put the knife down and walked into the living room. I knelt beside him. Did Mommy tell you I was coming to live with you? He shrugged, still focused on his cars. Kind of. She said Grandma can't live here forever. That night, I called David. My hands were shaking. David, I said, we need to talk. About the house. About what Sarah is telling Leo. He sighed on the other end of the line. A tired, frustrated sigh. Mom, don't make this into a drama. She's just trying to prepare him for a change. It's a good change. For who, David? I asked, my voice cracking. Is it a good change for me? To leave my home, the home your father built for us. There was a long pause. It's a good change for my family, Mom, he said, his voice quiet but firm. For my wife and my son. We need the space. We need the money from this house to have a future. I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, but it's the truth. I hung up the phone and cried that night. For the first time, I realized I was standing on one side of a fence, and my son was on the other. And the fence was made of bricks and mortar and a price tag. The weeks that followed were a strange, painful dance. We were polite. We were civil. We had dinner together. But a shadow had fallen between us. Every smile felt forced. Every conversation felt like walking on eggshells. The house, my sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield. I'd walk through the rooms, my hand trailing along the wall, and I'd say a silent goodbye to each one. Goodbye to the kitchen where I'd made 1,000 birthday cakes. Goodbye to the hallway where Frank's height marks for David were still faintly penciled on the doorframe. The final blow didn't come from a big argument. It came from a piece of paper. I was sorting through the mail one Tuesday afternoon. Bills, a catalog, and a thick, official-looking envelope. Addressed to me. I opened it with a sense of dread. It was a letter from a real estate agent. The letter was friendly, professional. It said they understood I might be considering selling my property, and they would be honored to represent me. It outlined their services, their commission, and their plan for marketing my home. They mentioned they had been recommended by a very satisfied client. Knew with a certainty that turned my blood cold who that satisfied client was. This wasn't a suggestion anymore. This wasn't a gentle nudge. This was a move. A chess piece being pushed. They had taken the step of contacting an agent without even talking to me first. It was a done deal in their minds. I was just an obstacle to be managed. Folded the letter neatly, put it back in the envelope, and placed it on the kitchen table. I didn't call David. I didn't call Sarah. I just sat there in the quiet and waited. I knew they would come, and they did, that very evening. They walked in, and I saw the question in David's eyes. Sarah's face was unreadable, a perfect, calm mask. I didn't say hello. I just pointed to the letter on the table. David picked it up. He read it, his face flushing a deep red. He looked at Sarah, then at me. Mom, we were just getting information. We thought it would be helpful. To see what it's worth. Sarah stepped forward, her voice smooth as oil. It's just a preliminary step, Maggie. No harm in knowing your options. David and I were going to sit down with you this weekend to talk about it all properly, and oh, you weren't, I said. My voice was quiet, but it was strong. It was the voice of a woman who had finally stopped being afraid. You were going to present it to me as a plan you'd already made. You sent a real estate agent to my house, Sarah. You invited a stranger to look at my home, to put a price on it before you even asked me how I felt about it one last time. David ran a hand through his hair. Mom, you're not being fair. We're trying to do what's best. This house, it's not practical. You can't live here forever. I know I can't live here forever, I said, my voice finally cracking. I know that, but this is my home. It's not just a financial transaction. It's where I raised you, David. It's where your father took his last breath. My memories are in these walls. You're not just asking me to sell a house. You're asking me to sell my life. The kitchen fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator. Sarah's mask finally slipped. Her face hardened. She wasn't the concerned daughter-in-law anymore. She was a woman who was used to getting what she wanted. Maggie, she said, her voice losing its smoothness and becoming sharp. Let's be realistic. This isn't about sentiment. It's about money. It's about Leo's future. It's about our future. We can't move forward with our lives with this weight around our necks. Your situation is holding us back. The words hung in the air. Your situation. She meant me. I was the weight. I was the thing holding them back. I looked at David, my son, my little boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. He was looking at the floor. He didn't defend me. He didn't say a word. It was then that Sarah delivered the final blow. She straightened her shoulders, crossed her arms, and looked me right in the eye. I think it's best if you find somewhere else to live, Mama. It's time. And that's when I smiled. That small, quiet, heartbreaking smile. The storm had finally broken. There was no use in fighting it. I was an old woman, and they had the future on their side. I had nothing left but my memories and my quiet dignity. Okay, dear, I said, placing the cloth down. I understand. Moved out 3 weeks later. It was the hardest 3 weeks of my life. I had to sort through a lifetime of belongings. Frank's tools, his old work shirts that still faintly smelled of him. David's baby. Clothes, his school reports, the little clay ashtray he'd made me in summer camp that I'd kept for 40 years. Leo's drawings, taped to the refrigerator, now faded and curled at the edges. I gave most of it away. I kept a few things. Frank's favorite photograph of us on our wedding day, a box of old letters, a quilt my own mother had made, and a small rose clipping from the garden. The rest was just things. David helped me move. He was quiet, shamefaced. He carried boxes without complaint, his shoulders hunched. He drove me to my new place, a small one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was clean, modern, and had no soul. The walls were white and bare. The kitchen was so small I could touch both counters at once. As he put the last box down, he stood in the middle of the empty living room, his hands in his pockets. "Mom," he started. "Don't," I said, cutting him off gently. "Don't apologize, David. It's done. Just go home to your family." He looked at me, his eyes wet, but he didn't argue. He just nodded, gave me a quick, stiff hug, and left. The click of the door behind him was the loneliest sound I'd ever heard. The first year was the hardest. The silence in that apartment was different from the silence in the house. In the house, the silence had been full of echoes. Here it was empty. I would wake up in the night, disoriented, not knowing where I was. I'd reach for the lamp on the bedside table that wasn't there. I missed the creak of the stairs, the view of the rose bushes from the kitchen window. I was grieving, not just for Frank, but for my home, for the family I thought I had, for the son who had chosen his wife's ambition over his mother's heart. I saw Leo sometimes. Sarah would drop him off for a few hours on a Saturday, but the visits were quick, awkward.
He'd grown.
He was a teenager now, all long limbs, and a phone glued to his hand. The light in his eyes when he talked about building a treehouse with his grandpa was gone.
Our
conversations were short.
Grandma.
Yeah, school's fine. I dunno. The distance between us was more than just the miles across town. It was a canyon carved out by silence and resentment. I heard about the house through the grapevine. They sold it. Got a good price, I was told. They used the money to buy a big, modern house in a new development on the edge of town. The house with the open concept and room for a dog. I pictured strangers living in my kitchen, painting over my yellow walls, tearing out my rose bushes for a bigger driveway. It felt like a physical pain, a tearing in my chest. But I breathed through it, and I let it go. I had to. I started to build a small life in my little apartment. I joined a weekly knitting circle at the community center. I made a few friends, other women my age, some widowed, some just alone. We'd sit and knit and talk, and our talk was of grandchildren and recipes and aching backs. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life. I planted the rose clipping from the old house in a pot on my tiny balcony. It was a stubborn, beautiful thing. It survived the move, and every year it bloomed, a little piece of my old garden right there in the new, empty space. Years passed. 4 of them. Leo was 18 now, about to go off to college. I hadn't seen him in over 6 months when I got a call. It was him. His voice was deep, a man's voice now. "Grandma," he said. "It's Leo." "Hi, sweetheart," I said, my heart clenching with a familiar ache. "Grandma, I'm sorry I haven't called. I've been busy, but I was wondering, could we meet? Maybe for a coffee? At the park near your place." He was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench, watching the kids play on the swings. He stood up when he saw me, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. He was so tall. He looked like Frank. The same square jaw, the same quiet way of standing. "Hi, Grandma," he said, his voice soft. "Hi, Leo." We sat down. There was a long, awkward silence. The leaves were just starting to turn, a few orange and yellow ones scattered on the grass. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything. For not visiting more. For not standing up for you. I was a kid. I didn't understand. I just heard what they said at home." "What did they say?" I asked, my voice gentle. He took a deep breath. "That you were being difficult. That you were stuck in the past. That you didn't want us to be happy." I believed them for a long time. But then, I don't know. I started to remember things. The cookies we baked. The stories about Grandpa. The way you let me name all the roses in the garden. And I realized the house wasn't just a house. It was you. Tears welled in my eyes. I reached out and took his hand. It was so big, wrapping around my small, wrinkled one. And then last week, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. Dad and I got into a fight. A big one. He was talking about my tuition and how they'd sacrificed so much. And I snapped. I asked him what they'd sacrificed. A house that wasn't theirs to sell? A mother's heart. He looked at me, his eyes wet. He started to cry, Grandma. My dad.
He cried.
And he told me the truth. He told me how it really happened. How Mom pushed, how he didn't stop her, how he saw your face when you said, okay. He said he's been living with that guilt every single day. He said he lost his best friend when he lost you. I couldn't hold back my tears then. They just spilled over, rolling down my cheeks. For the house, for Frank, for the years of silence. And now, for my son's pain. The inheritance wasn't the house, Leo, I whispered. It never was. The inheritance was the family. It was your grandpa's love and mine. That's what they sold. And that's what we all lost. Leo squeezed my hand.
He wants to see you, Grandma. He's too scared to ask. But he wants to.
We all need to talk that I didn't see him that day or the next. But a week later, there was a knock on my apartment door. Opened it, and David was standing there. He looked older, grayer. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked at me, and he didn't say a word. He just opened his arms. And I walked into them. I held my son for the first time in years, and we cried together. We cried for lost time, for a house that was now someone else's, for a father and husband gone too soon. We finally spoke about the inheritance that day. Not the money from the house, but the real one. The one we had almost lost forever. We spoke about guilt and regret and the terrible weight of silence. It wasn't easy. It was painful, but it was real. Sarah never did apologize. Some people can't. And that's okay. Forgiveness isn't always about them. Sometimes it's about you. It's about letting go of the heavy stone you've been carrying so you can finally put it down. My son comes to visit me every Sunday now. He brings coffee and we sit on my little balcony, looking at my rose bush. Leo calls me from college, telling me about his classes, his friends. The love is back. It's different, scarred, and a little fragile, but it's back. And that little apartment? It's starting to feel like home. I have my photographs on the wall, my mother's quilt on the bed, and the smell of Frank's old shirts is gone from the box, but his memory is alive in the stories I tell my son, and the stories he'll tell his own children someday.
The house is gone.
But the family, the real inheritance, we finally managed to save it. Just in time.